Breaking news from Shams Charania of ESPN just in. The Sacramento Kings are expected to open up talks to potentially deal All-Star guard De'Aaron Fox before the February 6th trade deadline here in 2025. And this is crazy news. Sources tell ESPN that there will be plenty of suitors, but it's believed that Fox specifically has a target destination in mind ahead of his 2026 free agency. And this is where we get to the stage of a player's career called pre-agency. And you might be saying, what is pre-agency? So as the NBA has evolved, you think back to 2010 when the Miami Heat signed Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade and LeBron James, all three to contracts in the same offseason. Why have we not seen that as much lately? You think back to Philadelphia this past offseason. They renounced rights on a ton of their players in order to open up max cap space to go out and sign someone like Paul George. Well, that hasn't aged very well because even though the Sixers have tradable draft assets and they have now 3-star players, quote unquote, what they don't have is a bunch of these mid-sized contracts, guys making between $10 to $25 million. And it leaves the Sixers in a spot where their depth has been really questioned this season. Even with Gershon Yabusele being a guy coming over from overseas and being a pretty significant positive for them, the Sixers have still had a very bad season. Now, of course, health, injuries, all of that stuff has played into it, of course, too. But I think holistically, when you look at some of the flaws in Philadelphia, a lot of that is caused by expending their depth, expending the guys that they had bird rights on in order to open up cap space for free agency. And this is where pre-agency opens up a lot more flexibility for teams. De'Aaron Fox, who's on a big contract, but not in a ginormous, massive contract quite yet. Him getting traded makes sense for both parties involved. It makes sense for Sacramento, and it makes a lot of sense for De'Aaron Fox for a few reasons. If De'Aaron Fox wanted to leave Sacramento, leaving in free agency, while that is an option, he would be potentially passing up pretty significant money, both the chance at a 5-year contract rather than a 4-year contract through bird rights, and also, obviously, with all NBA designations and the Supermax potential for him, if he does become eligible for that kind of Supermax extension, that would be something else he passes up by just flat out leaving in free agency rather than being traded and then ultimately extended. And for the teams trading for him, or trading him away, the Sacramento Kings specifically, trading him away is a lot better than losing him for nothing. And I think teams, agents, and players have all gotten a lot smarter and now look at them as partners who can mutually benefit each other. If De'Aaron Fox wants to get to destination X, Y, or Z, Sacramento could help get him there while also still landing a very good deal of assets and draft picks and young players in return for him. So, what are some of those potential destinations? Of course, you have some of the ties back to Texas, the Houston dynamic, the San Antonio dynamic. Those are two landing spots that I think do make a ton of sense. Now, if I had to bet what I think De'Aaron Fox, a day or two ago, I would not have predicted that the Kings would even be willing to trade him. Now we're at a point in time where it looks like De'Aaron Fox is possibly going to be on the move. Now, the Kings are still going to take a good package, a package that includes a lot of draft picks and young players, but that's what San Antonio and Houston both have to offer. Theoretically, the Rockets, of course, have Fred VanVleet's contract, so depending on how Sacramento wants to go about this, VanVleet could be looked at as a very good player still and one that could help Sacramento stay afloat. We know how that front office and how that ownership group specifically is probably fearful now of rebuilding with how kind of tumultuous the Kings had been for so long. Do they want to actually overgo a full rebuild again after trading Tyrese Halliburton to the Indiana Pacers a couple of years ago? That seems like kind of a disastrous decision if they go that way. So you can maybe build something around Fred VanVleet's contract. Of course, the Rockets have a ton of young players, whether that be Reed Shepherd or Cam Whitmore. I would think Amin Thompson's definitely unavailable in this. I would not expect Jabari Smith or Tari Eason to be included, but those are some of the players Sacramento would want. The Rockets also have access to the Phoenix Suns draft picks. They have a 2027 Brooklyn Nets first-round pick swap, which could be very valuable. And the Rockets have some of their own draft picks, too. So a real collection of draft equity that they could lure De'Aaron Fox in with in a trade with Sacramento. But then you look at San Antonio. They have a future Kings pick from the DeMar DeRozan sign and trade this past offseason. They have some Mavericks picks far out. They have a couple Minnesota Timberwolves picks from the Rob Dillingham trade on draft night in 2024. They have their own draft picks. They have Atlanta Hawks draft picks. So you kind of look at the picture here. Both teams have young players. Both teams have a numerous collection of draft picks. But then there's other destinations. Utah is another interesting one. They just made a big trade with the Phoenix Suns about a week ago. The Jazz were a rumored destination for Damian Lillard even a couple of years ago when the Blazers were heavily shopping him before ultimately trading him to Milwaukee. And even though I didn't think the Jazz were a team that made a ton of sense, and right now at this point in time they're not winning a ton, around Lauri Markkanen and De'Aaron Fox would be by far the best guard that they have in that organization. He would be a tremendous upgrade over some of the young players that they're playing right now. And just like Houston and San Antonio, Utah has a vast collection of draft picks as well. They have a bunch of unprotected stuff in the future. They have assets from Minnesota and Cleveland still. They have their own draft picks. They have equity along the way that could be very, very valuable to a team like Sacramento if they do look at undergoing a rebuild. And Utah has those young players that they could throw into a deal as well. There's a number of different destinations that I do think could make some sense for De'Aaron Fox. But this is interesting news. And if we just go look at Shams Charania profile here, it kind of comes out of nowhere. I don't think anyone was really expecting this, but it's just in. As of 8 minutes ago at the time I'm recording this, absolutely crazy stuff. It's a crazy world we live in. De'Aaron Fox, listen, I think if we're kind of putting together trade values here, it's going to be matching salary plus one good young player plus 3 first-round picks. I think that's going to be the package that a team looks for in return for him. Pretty comparable to what DeJounte Murray was traded to the Atlanta Hawks for from the San Antonio Spurs a few years ago. Matching salary, an intriguing long-term young player, and 3 first-round draft picks, maybe even 4. Maybe there's some pick swaps included into that as well. Maybe 3 firsts, 1 pick swap, maybe 4 firsts, 1 pick swap. Somewhere in that ballpark, anywhere from 3 real first-round picks to maybe 4 or 5 on the upper end, depending on what else is involved. Maybe it's a negative contract. But De'Aaron Fox would be a very fascinating player to potentially watch for. There's a ton of different avenues, right, where he could get traded. There's a bunch of teams that have picks. You know, obviously we have to talk about Miami in this too, amidst the Jimmy Butler sweepstakes. And again, if it comes down to a certain destination that De'Aaron Fox wants to get to, I've already talked about the Texas connection with Houston and San Antonio. Of course, you know, his wife and everything, where they're going to want to be together as a family is important. But when there's smoke, there's fire. There has been some smoke around De'Aaron Fox this season. I kind of thought that the recent winning streak would maybe have put that to rest. It seemingly has not, and it looks like Sacramento is now ready to play ball as well in a De'Aaron Fox trade. And pre-agency could go crazy here. If De'Aaron Fox wants to be in Miami, very possible he could end up in Miami as part of the Jimmy Butler trade, which would be absolutely crazy. There's a lot to watch for, a lot to keep our eyes on moving forward. Remember, I'm going to be live on the channel the entire week of the NBA trade deadline, so make sure to stay tuned for that as well. This is really important news. Kings fans, let me know in the comment section down below how you're feeling. Rockets fans, Spurs fans, Heat fans, let me know as well. Thanks all so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.